gender-neutral changing rooms. It comes after a transgender performance artist who identifies as being female says she was refused access to a female changing room in Manchester. A spokesperson for the company said in a statement that all Topshop Top Man customers are free to use any of the fitting rooms located within our stores. So a couple of guests to discuss this with, and of course with you on 03459 570057. With me in the studio is Joanna Rowland-Stewart, who's a trans woman and trans rep for Brighton Hove LGBT Community Safety Forum, and also on the line Caroline Farrow from Ash, who's a writer for Conservative Women. So Joanna, morning. First of all, for you, have Topshop got this right?
Sorry.
Have Topshop got this decision right about?
To have. To be fair, all people have one common thing: they're human, and humanity means respect for each other. And if you're saying to somebody, you aren't allowed in this place because we're not sure of who you are or what you are, it's humiliating, to say the least. Mm-hmm. Having a gender-neutral, safe spaces to change in is not something new, but it's good to see it coming on the high street.
And how does that look when we go into the changing areas? What do we see? What facilities are there then?
As you would expect in any changing cubicle, there really is no difference between changing cubicles for women and changing cubicles for men, because all you are there to is to change your clothes in privacy.
And so they would be individual cubicles open to everybody, rather than sometimes there are sort of more communal changing areas, aren't there?
Yes, they are. Communal changing areas have long been a problem for trans people, especially in sports and so on, where they are gender segregated, and the problem there is that then they may be very reluctant to actually change in view of people or other people of their preferred gender, because that may be judged perhaps on their appearance and presentation.
And in your experience, Joanna, is the move to individual cubicles open to everyone, are most shops, clothes shops, going to that now?
I haven't seen individual cubicles, and most shops still use a communal sort of changing area with cubicles with a curtain across, which isn't quite the sort of privacy you want. If you had a cubicle with a door you can close, it makes it easier and better. I must say I haven't visited Topshop, despite I've tried to, but last time I went to Topshop, it wasn't a problem. They were quite relaxed. There was no questioning of whether I could use the women's changing room.
Okay. Stay with us, Joanna. Caroline Farrow is from Ash, a writer for Conservative Women, joins us now. Caroline, hello.
Good morning.
Tell us, have Topshop Top Man got this right?
No, they haven't. I think what they've got wrong is nobody is objecting to there being a gender-neutral... Excuse me. Sorry,
Okay.
my throat's just gone.
All right.
Nobody is objecting to there being a gender-neutral space for anyone to choose, where... for if transgender men and women want to choose a gender-neutral space. But there also needs to be a separate, segregated space for biological women only. And the reason being is because women need their space and their privacy. And, it's not a slur against transgender women to say that actually women very often feel uncomfortable with people who are born biologically males, and if anybody can identify how they want, which is what's happened in Topshop. So a man who doesn't identify as a woman, who just says he's gender fluid or gender neutral or whatever it might be, and he was wearing a dress, he complained to Topshop that he got turned away from the women's changing area. And on the basis of this one complaint, Topshop have changed their policy. Now there are numerous cases of men with smartphones and what have you, slipping them under the curtains of changing room, taking sort of upskirt pictures of women, invading women's privacy. And I think there is a real danger in saying, okay, let's make this let's take away female-only spaces. If people don't don't feel safe in either a male or a female space, then they can use a third one. They can have a gender neutral. So I think we actually have to find a way of being sensible and balancing rights here and saying, okay, we understand that trans women don't want to necessarily use the men's. What can we do to accommodate them with at the same time not compromising on safety and privacy and dignity and boundaries for women?
Okay.
I'm mother of, sorry, can I just say, I'm mother of a 13-year-old girl who has just going through puberty and is needing bra fittings and what have you. Now, I took her for a bra fitting the other day, and she was so worried that there might be, boys around and what have you, and I had to stand guard at the cubicle, and you can't actually have a go at women who have their boundaries for whatever reason.
Okay. Caroline, thanks for that. Joanna, talk to Caroline here.
Hi, Caroline. This is Joe.
Hello.
Hi. Interesting. I can understand your concerns about women being uncertain of their safety, but trans women identify as women, and there's no earthly reason to suggest why they would not want to disrespect women. Why would they want to disrespect women in cubicles? Because they identify as women, irrespective of their actual physical makeup.
Sure, I know, and I think I'm not saying that, and I'm certainly not trying to cast a slur against trans women who've been through, the whole process of transition and everything that comes along with that. And I have happily myself used a public loo with a woman a very well-known woman who's transgender, and I had no problem with it at all. I wasn't concerned for my safety. But I think what is worrying is where you get, and I've seen a lot of this in Brighton, where you get people who are gender fluid and who aren't quite sure how they identify, or one day they appear to be one thing, and it is very off-putting for women when you've got someone who is really discernibly looks like a male wearing a dress in amongst their spaces. And there is also, and there are cases of people who are perhaps pretending or lying about how they identify to use women's spaces. And if you do this, if you sort of say, well, okay, let's make every single space gender neutral instead of just keeping one for women, you are unfortunately going to get predatory males who will exploit that. So by all means, have a third space. Don't take away women's private spaces.
Have you actually recorded a case of a predatory male dressing up in women's clothes and pretending to be trans in order to access women's spaces for nefarious purposes? I simply don't hear of it happening.
I think I'd have to look one. I mean, there's a whole Facebook page called This Never Happens, and I think there's several social media pages and sites called This Never Happens, which does actually have cases of these sorts of things happening. I think there was one in America a couple of weeks ago where actually a child was assaulted in a public bathroom was sexually assaulted in a public bathroom by someone who identified as being a transgender woman. I don't know the name or date of that case, so it does happen.
Well, one thing you both said in the course of the conversation is about feeling uncomfortable in a situation. I think, Joe, you referred to it in perhaps a changing room at a sports centre, and Caroline, you said about women who are biologically women perhaps feeling uncomfortable having trans women in there as well. So do we have to take each other's discomfort into account here?
Yeah. I think there's a balancing of rights is what we're asking for, and I think it's very unreasonable where you have a woman who's been a victim of sexual assault or child rape or whatever. It's very if you get a situation where you have a woman who's been a victim of sexual trauma, it's very unreasonable to say to her, well, you should get over that trauma. Just as it's unreasonable of me to say to my 13-year-old, you should get used to changing around people who are men or who are males, and you should be more open about your body and what have you, because actually that's all about teenagers and girls finding their boundaries, finding what's comfortable for them, and it's actually quite abusive to try and transgress those boundaries. So I think it's about a fair balancing of rights. So of course I would not say to a transgender woman, you must use the males, because obviously there are men out there that I completely appreciate that trans women are at a high risk of assault from men who feel threatened, and I'm not downplaying that, but I think we have to balance rights. I think we have to.
Okay, Caroline, and Joanna, your thoughts on that, kind of appreciating each other's discomfort.
We are. I think we are. I think a solution might be, whether it's possible that shops can do this, is to have a male segregated changing space, a female segregated changing space, and the majority of changing cubicles is gender neutral.
Right. So three options. Would
Yes.
that be enough? Would that be about right? You
It
think?
might be.
Okay.
It all depends on the space available. Of
Caroline,
course.
would you kind of agree with Joanna on that?
I would agree on there being three options. That seems fair and reasonable. But I would also say within that, if you've got a shop that's predominantly female, predominantly for the female market, like Topshop or Miss Selfridge, or one of these shops which traditionally caters for women, then actually if we're kind of sharing out allocation of spaces, you don't need a men's changing room in Topshop or in a women's clothing store. So you have maybe three quarters of the fitting room space, for women, and then maybe a smaller space, because this is all about encroaching on female spaces, and this is what's making a lot of people very uncomfortable.
But Joanna would say that's a space for her as well, as somebody who identifies as a female. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think if Joanna looks like a female, and passes well as a female, and and basically, it's very awkward, because you don't want to make this all about genitals. I appreciate that, but I also see that it could be uncomfortable if, particularly in a communal space, if people are kind of getting undressed or whatever, it could be uncomfortable particularly for young girls to be confronted with male genitalia. So I just think the most sensible thing to do is to say, okay, where we've got female clothing stores, and where the stores perceive there a need to be gender neutral spaces, make some space for them, but don't do it at the expense of women.
Okay, I can understand where you're going, but the problem then is perception. I had a manager where I used to work who was biologically female. She was born female, identified as female, but she was taller than me. She was about 5'9", broad-shouldered, and a deep voice, and she was immediately faced with this barrier. Oh, you're not a woman, and if we start judging everybody, it doesn't say much for our society in the 21st century, does it?
Yeah, but it's not judging people. It's not saying, okay, you're a bad person, or you're not making moral judgments on people. But what you are saying is, okay, I can see where somebody is very obviously, not a female, and I've
but it's about how somebody feels about themselves, isn't it, as well as how they look. Is that right, Joanna?
Yes, it
is.
is.
A fair thing to say, right?
Yeah, but it's also about it's also about female safety, and so any. Using this, how you feel about yourself would give, a predatory male who is trying to access female spaces, it could give them, carte blanche to say, okay, well, you're making me feel bad. I think we just
I see. And is that then down to the stores to kind of, if you like, police that and monitor their changing rooms to make sure that doesn't happen? Because they ought to be making sure that doesn't happen anyway, shouldn't they?
Well, I mean, possibly, yeah. I mean, and policing is maybe a harsh word, but
stewarding their changing rooms, because they steward them to make sure you don't nick clothes. So they should be looking out for other behaviour as well, shouldn't they?
Yeah. I think so, and I think we talk about feelings, but sometimes feelings can't trump safety, and
that's not to discount your feelings when you're in a changing room, Caroline, as well. Yours have to be appreciated too, don't they?
Exactly, and it's about saying, okay, this is quite a new phenomenon for society. We're actually changing 2,000 years or more, or in fact, evolutionary history. We are suddenly, in a very short space of time, changing what society understands as what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Suddenly, the old definitions are being swept away, and we're being told, okay, actually, biological sex no longer determines whether or not you are a man or a woman, and so that that is a very, very new change. And suddenly we're being asked to take this on board and cast aside everything that we understand and we've learned about interactions between men and women, and it's not quite that simple. Unfortunately, sexual violence against women is a massive problem.
Janet, final word on this, please.
I think at the end of the day, it's about mutual respect for each other, making space for each other, to actually say that we need to act as gatekeepers of who can go into the women's changing room or who can go into the men's changing room. Gender is a social construct. Biological sex, I cannot change my DNA. There's no Star Trek-like procedure that can make me biologically female. But as a woman, I live my life as a woman and expect to be accepted as a woman, and that does mean in changing spaces. Now, it's a matter of, as I said, of mutual respect. You raised a very good example of being worried about safety, but again, this is down, as you said, to the shop doing something, and most shops do.
Okay. And as Caroline said, things have changed quite quickly, and we're kind of getting used to that new way of thinking. And I'm sure we haven't solved it today, but we've certainly come out of this better informed. So thank you both for taking part. That's Joanna Rowland-Stewart and Caroline Farrow with us on BBC Sussex and BBC Surrey. And as always, I'd like to hear your view on 03459 570057.